Thank you, Professor Inbar. It's absolutely delightful. Any lecture on Israel is terrific, especially from you. You are simply brutal at times, but very frank. I'm just getting questions on the chat box. Probably you will ask them. I will ask them to raise directly. Ambassador Sanjay Singh, sir.
Professor Inbar, thank you for your very fascinating talk. It's always a pleasure listening to you.
Thank you.
And I remember your lecture about 6 months back, if I'm not mistaken, when you talked about the absolute centrality of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And the point still continues. And you've told us that his popularity is still about 40% popularity. Because I have a series of questions. I had a series of questions before this talk began, and now have many more. But I will not try and hog this whole question answer session. I'll just pose you a few questions. Firstly, Israel is in a difficult neighborhood. And frequent elections do they affect governance in Israel? And what does the electorate think about this problem of frequent elections perhaps affecting governance and perhaps affecting security of Israel itself? Because this is an issue that will have to be spoken of, both in terms of the leadership as well as of the system. I heard what you had to say about the system, and I heard what you had to say about the leadership. But will this election lead to a rethink about both the system and the leadership? The other point about the leadership itself, you said, you talked about the Tina factor. There is no alternative. Now, the point is that if you have led a country for 10 years and happily kept your rivals out, then there is no alternative. And is that a good thing in a democracy? So I know politics is a rough sport, but sometimes you have to, as a statesman, rise above politics and rise above personal ambitions. So I do not know how you would react to that. And then I have a particular question about the Arab vote. And it's very interesting what you said about the Arab vote, that they voted. Now, as I understand it, I might be wrong, that 20% of the voters are of Arab origin or Arabs. Do they vote for any non-Arab parties? And do any Jewish voters vote for the Arab parties? And finally, is there any effect of the Abraham Accords on the outlook of the Arab parties and the Arab voters? I leave you at that. Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor Kumaraswamy, for giving me this opportunity. I was asking him last week, why aren't you having a session on the Israeli elections? And I'm glad he's had this today.
Okay, the Arab vote is less than 20% because it's a very young population under voting age. The Arabs, there are Arabs that vote for Zionist parties, and I mentioned that there are Arab candidates on two parties on the left. There are also Jews that vote for the United Arab List, primarily that identify with communists or identify with a very radical approach to two-state solutions. They take the rights of the Palestinians, so they are things that this is the right party to vote for, to make sure that this point of view is well heard. But they have been marginalized. This elections, the voting turnout among the Arab sector was much lower, was below 50%. Primarily because the Arab voters were disappointed by the United Arab list that championed Palestinian rights and forgot the needs of the Arab Israelis. So this was the Arab sector. Obviously, going to elections so often, Jews are the chosen people, but now we became the choosing people. So it's not a good position to be in. And I think most Israelis realize that, a country without a national budget is something very problematic. And obviously many decisions are not being taken because of the lingering political crisis. I think one reason, for Bibi not winning the elections, they got tired of them. Come on, you brought us to so many elections. Enough. I'm not going to vote against you, but I'm not voting. So governability has been definitely affected. In terms of national security, I think there is a problem. I just written a piece, will be appear tomorrow on Channel 2. I don't want to elaborate on it. It's, the IDF has no budget. It has a multi-year plan with no budgetary resources for it. I think also our Arab neighbors do not always understand, the intricacies of democracies, and they look at us, Netanyahu was a good leader, good to have dealings with him, and suddenly, things change. Is he the guy to make dealings with? I think also in terms of deterrence, this type of successive elections helps propagate the image of Israel divided, that will eventually disappear because of internal tensions. This is a preferred image, in Iran or among our enemies. So it's not useful for our national security. Also, there is the Abraham Accords. If we take a look at the, I spoke about Ram as being a positive development. I'm not sure that, in Abu Dhabi, in Bahrain, in Cairo, they see Islamist party joining Netanyahu government. It's something very, beneficial. So it's, there are a lot of tensions in that respect. So it's not only domestic politics, it's also, external politics. So it's problematic, definitely. And I hope we'll not get to the fifth election, but hope is not enough. About grooming successors. I think this is a typical, political problem of many leaders. I don't know, it's a situation in India or in other places. Grooming successors is dangerous. I remember, Mubarak didn't have a deputy. And people asked him, why don't you have a deputy? Deputies develop ambitions, it's ambitions of politicians are a dangerous thing for leaders. So, we are human beings, let's face it. So, not every, great leader is able to overcome his fears and groom successful successors. Look at Merkel. Take a look at it in other countries. We have good leaders. Did de Gaulle produce a successor? Churchill, did he produce a successor? So that's a perennial question, and I think usually the answer, no, they don't. And for simple reasons. Okay.
Our friend Joseph Kishishian, please.
Thank you, Kumar. It's always a pleasure to listen to Efraim Inbar. One always learns from him more than one anticipates. throughout the years that I have known Efraim, I've always learned from him. And actually listening to him during the past hour or so raised several questions, not just about these elections, but about whether or not the entire Israeli political system, are you ready, Efraim, for my question? Whether the entire Israeli political system is becoming Lebanonized. That is, you have now, you said in your remarks, Efraim, that coalition governments brought social cohesiveness, unity, and all these wonderful things. One can make the argument that the opposite is also accurate, that coalition governments give you the results that you are seeing in Israel during the past 4 elections, and you anticipate a 5th one, and perhaps a 6th one down the line, because that serves Netanyahu's interest. He can stay a prime minister forever. But at the same time, it does raise some of Ambassador Singh's questions about the dangers of dysfunctionality, which is exactly what is happening in Lebanon, where coalition governments have essentially led to a failed state, a collapsing economy, a collapsing society, and far more important, a collapsing political system. So my question to you is the following. Do you see a danger that there could be some kind of a threat to the institutional makeup by going through these frequent exercises that give you no results? And is that dangerous in your view or not? Thank you.
I don't know what will happen, of course. So my answer is, with a caveat. The caveat is my hopes that, eventually we'll put an end to this crisis. I admit that it's maybe comfortable to say that this is because of Netanyahu, personal, and it's not a systemic reason. So having said that, I think that, first of all, there's a big difference between us and Lebanon. We have no militias. That's a big difference. Of course, so we have monopoly over use of force, and which Lebanon lacks, and some of our neighbors also lack, Syria. But this is an important element in any political system, monopoly over use of force. I think also that there is a learning process. Basically, in the last 4 elections, we see actually a gradual weakening of Likud. And which reflects to a great extent, the greater criticism of Netanyahu. We may need another election, maybe 6th election, to convince some in Likud to put an end to it. But I think our institutions are strong. Of course, there is a danger in every democratic system of malfunctioning. I don't deny that. In the meantime, our economy functions very well, despite Corona. The policies adopted by the government brought no social unrest, which could have augmented the crisis. So, and we are getting out of the crisis, at least that's what it seems. So I'm still not afraid of the collapse of the political system in Israel. But of course, this is a distinct possibility if there is no real learning curve on part of the Israeli electorate and the Israeli political echelons. That's always a possibility. Look what happened in America, Trump, so even the great democracy like the United States reached a certain stage of alienation that was unheard before. So far, the Israelis are not alienated from the political system. And, there is a good sense of citizenship, and of course, we don't like to pay taxes like everybody else. But otherwise, we are good citizens.
We have Nina Slama from Herzliya,
Yes.
IDC. Yes, Nina.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Inbar, for this talk. I would like to ask, how can Netanyahu change his image in Israel?
I think it's too late for it. No, it's really, he has been a prime minister 14 years, and his wife is with him for such a long period. By the way, there is entirely different persona when you talk to him in private. In private, there is a curious person, a guy that gets things very fast, extremely intelligent, knows how to ask the right questions. And I've been in 6 eyes with him several times. He is a most impressive person, well-read. I wouldn't say an intellectual but he still reads, and he's of a different class of politicians, unquestioned. And I don't think he can change his image, particularly, I have a lot of, being in academia, I have a lot of leftist friends, so colleagues. So, it's for him, for them, whatever he does, doesn't matter. There is no good side to it. So he lost a part of the Israeli public. And being a ruthless politician, and that's what he is, of course, he doesn't acquire friends. He has no friends. He's alone, very much alone. And sometimes I pity him because, being alone, prime minister of a country like Israel that, has a lot of problems, is not an easy job. And he is doing it well, but he's alone. And since he doesn't trust people, there are very few people around him that he listens to them and get good advice. At my institute, we have General Amidror, who was National Security Advisor, who is a civil servant and with no personal agenda. And he's one of the few that, he's being called once in a while and say his view about things. But otherwise, most people are painted by his wife or him. So no, I don't think he can change this. He's doomed in the position he is, and of course, history will have many good things to tell about him. But we know people. Leaders don't know when to leave. Don't know when to leave. Ben Gurion, for example, our greatest leader, didn't know when to leave, and he ended not in the most nicest way. He's the nicest.
Moinuddin Ahmad has a couple of questions. Moinuddin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Inbar. My question was partially asked by Ambassador Sanjay Singh, but I would like to ask the perspective from within Likud, that if Netanyahu fails to form the government this time around, should Likud be looking for a person beyond him, or would they like to stick with him? And just an additional question, because if the other coalition happens to form the government, which looks very difficult, will it have its impact on the Abraham Accords with the Arab neighbors? These are my two questions. Thank
No,
you.
I think that the Abraham Accords command the great consensus in Israel. It doesn't matter who is in power. They'll continue to deal in order to expand those accords as much as possible. Concerning Likud, as long as he's prime minister and can decide who are his ministers, of course, he generates fear among his party colleagues. And we will see less chances of seeing a rebellion against him. The courage of politicians is always limited. So,
Rohit Sharma has a question, please.
Thank you, sir. So my question is that does Benny Gantz still holds the position of alternate prime minister since the government is still in transition and there is no clear majority in the Knesset? Thank you.
yes, he still has this title due to a law that was passed, when they established the National Unity Government. And if this interim government continues to survive somehow until September, he will probably be the next prime minister. This is the worst case scenario for Netanyahu. So therefore, he'll try to build a coalition or call elections soon in order to prevent this scenario from being realized.
While waiting for others, can I ask you a question? In spite of all the elections, is Netanyahu wanting to stay in office just to prevent the indictment, or is it something he simply enjoys being in office?
Well, he has been indicted already. He cannot prevent. And he, as prime minister, he has a right to all legal procedures until it goes to the Supreme Court. So he can extend his legal problems, for years if he is prime minister. I don't think this is a reason why he wants to be prime minister. I think it's ideological. He feels that on his shoulders is a burden of Jewish history. I would give him this benefit. And he obviously thinks that he's best fit to lead the Jewish state. He's chosen. He's chosen, for doing the job. And I think it's ideological, personal. By the way, the legal problems, I think they are greatly exaggerated. And the case against him is rather thin. And well, I'm not a legal expert, but this is what seems to be. A few bottles of champagne and cigars. Come on, that's not.
To continue with that, Netanyahu is still popular. More than 40% of the Israelis, even those who don't vote for Likud, still think he's a strong leader. And if you look at the non-Netanyahu coalition, we don't even have an idea who can be a realistic chance of being a prime minister. There are too many leaders in that. Does it mean the absence of an alternative leader actually works well for him, and which the opposition is unable to recognize? Rather than simply rallying around a person, everyone wants to challenge Netanyahu. In the process, you are only strengthening Netanyahu rather than defeating him.
Yeah, but the fact is that he's not being defeated. He's still somehow, and they want to defeat him, and this is what unites them. And the question is, are they ready to pay certain prices for unseating Netanyahu? And so far, their own calculations show that they are not ready to do that. It may change now. The fear of a fifth election, can justify many things. So There are, possibilities of changing your mind by being patriotic and preventing a fifth election. And this goes, to bring people into Netanyahu's bloc, but also goes into the other direction. So
in that case, I had to ask you, what is the difference between the fourth and the fifth election? If I accepted fourth one, I can accept a fifth one also. What is that difference which you think people will be more uncomfortable with the fifth election, not having seen four? They could see one more.
I think we've seen a serious drop in almost 5% in the voter turnout. So we may get, there is a certain wariness of elections.
Okay.
Some people say, why should I go vote now? We'll have a fifth election, and the fifth election say, why should I go vote now? We'll have a sixth election. So there is a clear wariness of voting, of this election cycle, and which is not healthy, of course. But eventually something will happen. I don't think that we can go on like this. This is my hope. Again, Joseph raised the question, is it, going to become a dysfunctional system? I have hopes. I have, I believe that will eventually grow up. But I admit, it's subjective.
Sabina Hamid, you have any question? The final one? We are well past our time.
Yeah, one sec. Thank you, Professor Inbar, for your very insightful lecture. I was just thinking, is there a deep state in Israel?
I'm not sure what you mean by a deep state, but if you think about certain structures that actually make the decision instead of the politicians, no, we don't have this. Of course, there are strong institutions like the IDF, which is the military, or the Ministry of Defense, certain groups, industrial groups, but still, we don't have a deep state in the sense that the Turks are talking about, that is running the state under the nose of elected government. No, we don't have this.
Netanyahu himself alluded to the presence of deep state working against him. He was reportedly saying something. So
he says for years that the media is against him, the leftist media, although there are more and more right-wingers within the media. It's true that the media, the academia is against him. But this is typical of other countries as well. Look what happened to Trump. Also in India, I believe that the media is more on the left. It's that's what he claims, but nevertheless, he was successful in getting elected several times. And despite the media and the universities, I always claim that people think that the New York Times has too much influence. They don't, and universities also don't have. People are afraid. Oh, my son is going to a left-wing liberal university. What will become of him? So I usually say, they grow up.
And you are making a very depressing statement. Universities don't have an influence. We were all thinking that we are going to change the world, transform the world. You are actually depressing me.
I'm modest.
It's delightful, Abraham. Inbar, it's delightful to listen to you. We have heard you so many times, and most of the things you are saying about Israel is reasonably familiar to me. But still, the manner in which you are reading the events, that's absolutely delightful. I'm sure that all of us enjoy, without whether you are critical of Netanyahu or appreciating his good things, you are very sharp either way. It's, you don't allow your personal likes and dislikes to color your outcome. That's something fascinating for us to listen. But one thing which you really want is the fourth election, yes, but the fatigue is setting in. I think that's probably a warning for all the constituents of the system to come out with some sort of a working arrangement, at least no election for the next couple of years, if not later. Ideally, 4 years. Given the situation, it's not going to happen. But once again, we're extremely grateful to you for taking your time and sharing your knowledge with us. And until we meet again, stay well, stay safe, and stay healthy. Once